Hi, welcome to the garage. I'm David Schoneman. Have you ever wondered about taking a pile of rusty, old, vintage motorcycle parts like this and making them into something like this? We're going to show you how. Stay with us. Hi, welcome back to the garage. We're ready to start our project, and you've noticed that I've cleaned the bench off. In the opening segment there, we had the bench piled with some vintage motorcycle parts. I've cleaned it off because I want to start with a clean slate. This workbench here is our clean slate. We're probably never going to see it this clean again until the project's all done. The bench behind me is a different story, but this right here is going to be our project bench, and we want to start clean. Coffee cup is okay. Before I start on a bike project, I always want to consider a few things. One is, what do I want the bike to be? Maybe I've seen a bike on the road somewhere, or I've seen a picture somewhere, and I think, that's kind of the style that I like. So that's one aspect. We want to start with an idea of what we want the finished bike to look like. On the other end, I usually start with an inventory of my parts. And I want to see, can I make what I want out of the parts that I have? And if those parts are insufficient, how much do I need to buy or to acquire or to make or whatever to bring those two things together? I may find it's a style I like, but the parts I have for that style are too few or not right. And so I may adopt or change the style and then look at my parts and say, yeah, I can get closer to my goal if I change the style a little bit. So I just want to bring those two things together, find that they can meet in the middle. For instance, here in the shop, we've got Moto parts, we've got Kawasaki parts, we've got BMW parts. We've got all kinds of parts, Honda parts. What do we want to use in order to make the bike that we want? And of course, somewhere along the line in there, we have to plan a budget. Because if you've got boxes of parts, chances are some of those parts are not going to be usable, or some of those parts may be missing. A project may come to you just a frame and a motor. But whatever you have, you need to think about, is that sufficient? And what more do I have to add to that? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of the bikes here in the shop. I want to show you some of the different styles we have. And then I've got some other information on styles. And then we'll talk about inventory later. Okay, I'd like to show you a few bikes around the shop as we get ready to begin our project. The idea here, once again, is to take a look at some of the styles that are out there. And then as we look at our parts later, we'll figure out what kind of bike we want to build and ride. First one I want to show you, I'm going to show you them several bikes in a progression. We're going to start with cafe racer style and move up to more enduro style. And customized bikes, fit that entire gamut. And there are others that are outside of this range too, but these are the ones that I have here in the shop, and probably I'll stay within this range as we're building the new bike. First is a cafe racer. I did not build this bike. This bike was built by a guy that I know who is a very skilled racer. He raced bikes. He raced this bike briefly. I doesn't want to race it anymore. But this is a true race style bike or a cafe racer. A few things I'd like you to notice as we're talking about a cafe racer style. One is the seat height. Notice how low this seat is. Other motorcycles will have a seat that's up to about this high. That allows for more padding, but that also raises the center of gravity. And when you raise the center of gravity, you reduce the bike's ability to turn a corner. The handling is diminished. So we've got a nice low seat, so the center of gravity is low, which is good for handling. But notice how thin this seat is. This is not going to be very comfortable. This is going to be a challenging ride, a hard ride, but the bike is designed to be ridden hard. It's designed like a race bike. Now, there are true race bikes, like this one was built to be for amateur racing. And there are cafe racer styles, which are a little gentler, I guess, in terms of riding position. But this one is a true racing bike and now a cafe racer style. So it's got a thin seat, a low seat for center of gravity. It's got a hump in the back. This keeps the rider from sliding backwards. It's a single seat bike. We call this a one-up. A two-up would be rider and passenger possibility, but this is just a one-up saddle. And it's designed to keep the rider from slipping back as he accelerates. I'll come around the other side. We'll talk about a few other things. We've got our foot pegs down here, and the normal position for a foot peg on this bike would be somewhere around here. Pull a chair over to get comfortable. It would be somewhere around here, and that has the pegs kind of in line, would have had the pegs kind of in line with the back of the tank to allow for a more upright position. This, as a Cafe Racer style, has the pegs back a little bit, so this is more of the lean forward style of riding. Leaning forward puts more of the rider's weight towards the front of the bike, which puts more weight on the front wheel, which enhances handling, gives it more of a balance of weight distribution. If you're sitting upright, most of the rider's weight is on the rear wheel, and the front wheel doesn't handle quite as well. So leaning forward, getting the foot pegs back and leaning forward will increase the handling ability of the bike, improve the handling ability. So we've got rear sets. We also have what are called clip-on handlebars. The normal handlebars on this bike would be up here. Some of the bikes I'll show you later will have the handlebars up about this high, but this has very low handlebars, so that contributes to the lean forward position. They're down low, which means you're going to be riding leaning forward, and that's not going to be for an all-day ride. If you want a bike for an all-day ride, you probably don't want to go Cafe Racer unless you're a lot younger than I am, and you don't mind that kind of thing. We've got a very Spartan kind of instrument panel. It's single speedometer, no tachometer on this bike. A racing bike might have a tachometer as well, but this one is just a high-quality German speedometer. It's got a basic toggle switch. There's no key on this bike. You just hit the toggle, and now it's ready to start. A nice, bright neutral light. I'm not sure if you can see that in the picture, but it's a nice, bright neutral light so that you always know if you're in neutral or in a gear. We'll turn that back off. Also, I'll turn the handlebar here, and you can take a look at the front of the bike. This is a custom setup. It's got two lights. These are called projection-style headlamps. They're on the left side, and a large aluminum plate over here. This is where you would put a number if you're racing. You go to a track, you're assigned a number for the day. You would stick your number in this spot here, so now you've got a number plate on your Cafe Racer bike. Up front here, we have dual discs, 2 disc brakes for better stopping power. That's a stock setup. Some of these bikes had a single disc. This one is set up with 2. I'm not sure if this one was 2 originally or if the guy who built it put the second disc on there. But this is Cafe Racer style. Low handlebars, very low handlebars. You can see they're right even with the BMW logo here, and the others will be, like I say, considerably higher. We got 2 disc brakes. This bike also has a carburetor modification. These are not the stock carburetors. These are aftermarket Japanese carburetors by a company called Mikuni. Very high quality. You get a little more power out of these carburetors. We got the rear sets, and we have a low saddle. Now this bike is street legal, so it's got mufflers on it. They don't muffle it a lot. They're still pretty loud, but they sound really, really good. And we got a place for license plate, and we got headlight, brake light, tail light, turn signals, all that kind of thing. So this is the Cafe Racer style. We're going to move to the next style. It's going to be a little bit taller. All right, we'll switch bikes. Okay, the next bike I want to show you is a Moto Guzzi V50. But before we get into the details about this bike, I realized on the last segment that I forgot to tell you what that other racing bike was, that Cafe Racer. That is a BMW. It's a R65 frame. It means it had a 650 engine in it originally. The 65 stands for 650 on the engine. But this has been updated to a 900cc motor. So it's an R90 motor in an R65 frame. It fits fine, but that enhances the power. So although that's an R65 originally, it's been enhanced to an R90, and it's essentially, it's a homologation of a lot of different bikes in there. So we got a frame from one era or one size, a motor that's different, and then other parts were kind of matched together to make the bike. So it's essentially a mid-70s, maybe up to early 80s BMW that's been customized. But now back to the bike I want to show you now. This is a 1981 Moto Guzzi V50. The 50 stands for 500cc motor. This is a bike that I built. In fact, we just finished it recently. If you follow us on Facebook or see any of our posts, you'll know that we took it out for a test ride. about a month ago on some mild weather that we had here in Nashua in January, very mild weather. And it runs great. This bike project I started about a year and a half ago, and took it all down to the frame and built it back up. Now this style, a couple things I want to show you. It's got higher handlebars, and the foot pegs are back a little bit from where they were originally, but not very much. This is a little more of an upright riding position than the Cafe Racer I showed you before. I call this one a roadster. You may not see roadster style motorcycles if you look online. It's just a name that I've come up with that I think talks about what this bike is. This is a wind in the hair kind of a motorcycle, and it's the sense that I get when I ride it. Some people might call this a street bike. It is a street bike. It's got somewhat knobby tires, good for traction on the road, maybe a little bit of dirt riding, but not very much. But it's designed for the curvy back roads around Nashua here. From where we have the shop right here, about 10 minutes out of town, we're on some very nice roads. And this bike is for carving those curves and enjoying the scenery. A little longer distance ride would be possible on this than on the Cafe Racer style because the seating position is a little more upright. I'll come around the other side here, pull my chair up again. Let's start with the seat like we did last time. The seat is not as high as a stock seat would be, but it's not as low as that Cafe Racer seat. This seat, I've incorporated some aircraft style memory foam in here. It's firm when it's cold, a little cool in the shop today, but as your body warms it up, you sink into it. It gets very comfortable. So this is has a little more padding, a little more comfort associated with it than the Cafe Racer. We've cleaned out all this material that was in here. There'd be battery in here and all kinds of electronic gear. Put all that under the tank. The reason for that is to clean up the look. So we want a very clean looking bike, somewhat Spartan looking, so that it's basic bike showing the frame and the engine and the tank, but not so Spartan as to become a racing bike. I mentioned a moment ago that the foot pegs would have been about here on the original bike. I moved them back a little bit, not very far, not radical. I wouldn't really call these rear sets. Rear sets would be considerably further back. These are still basically in line with the back of the tank, the front of the seat, whereas rear sets, traditional rear sets, typical rear sets would be quite a bit further back. We've talked about the handlebars. Handlebars, you can see, are, just by looking at them, they're quite a bit higher. The clip-ons, they're called clip-ons on the other bike because they clip on to the fork tube here and they come out down here, so they're quite a bit higher. If I turn the handlebar, remember from the last scene, the handlebars were right about the logo position, and now they're here, they're considerably higher. Again, it's a simple cockpit, simple instrument panel, single speedometer, no tack on this one. Get the basic information here in a nice small package. We haven't gone with projector lights or anything like that here. It's more traditional headlight. You got dual disc. This bike was stock, standard with dual disc brakes up front. And these brakes, Moto Guzzi being an Italian bike, they're using Italian brake components, which I think are the best. These are Brembo brakes. They're not the modern Brembo brakes like you find on a modern Ducati or something like that, which are fantastic. Although these are an earlier generation of Brembo, they're still very, very good. So you get excellent stopping power from these brakes. The tires that we chose here, these are Metzeler's. Metzeler, we call Block C. It's a traditional tire. This is a tire that was designed for this bike originally, but I've gone up a little bit on the size. The original tires would look small, and this is a lightweight bike. So the tires were small and made the bike look even lighter and smaller than it is. And I wanted something to look a little larger. So for aesthetics, I went up a larger size on the front and larger size on the rear. We've used stock carburetors, but we took out the normal air filtration induction system here, and we put on some velocity stacks. That's part style and part functionality. The motor breathes better, so it'll develop some more power. The tank on this bike is not the original Moto Guzzi tank. This is from a bike called the Benelli. Benelli was an Italian dirt bike that was marketed by Sears and Montgomery Ward's. If you remember those companies back in the 70s. But they have very cool tanks, And, you know, back in those days, that's one of the reasons I like working on bikes of this vintage is that style was cool. I liked it. Today, a lot of motorcycles and cars, they all look alike. But back then, they were distinctive. And this particular tank is very distinctive. And it suits this bike very well because it's narrow here. So this is a light bike. It's a narrow bike. And with the tank being narrow, it just contributes to the overall look of the bike. It's only 2.5 gallons, so there's not a lot of range on a bike like this. I've got a bike over here. You can't see it in this picture, but it's a modern BMW, and that one has almost 9 gallons of fuel. So here we have a small tank. We'll get about 100 miles, maybe 120 miles or so before we need to stop for gas. The race bike you saw a moment ago, that's got the stock tank, a larger tank. You can go longer. But a bike like this, it's not made necessarily for long rides without stopping. It's for carving the back roads and getting gas and a cup of coffee and hanging out with your friends and talking a little bit. So that's the 1981 Moto Guzzi V50. Again, we just finished this bike, and it's a wonderful bike. This is one of my favorite bikes in the shop. Let me show you something else we did here. We'll turn the handlebar this way. I don't know if you can see it in the picture, but all the switches that are normally clamped on the handlebar, in this case, are built into the handlebar. So we've got a left turn signal, light control, horn button. Over here we have right turn signal, and we've got engine start. And the switch on this one, again, there's no key associated with it. The switch on this one is underneath here. We'll flip that on, and it's now ready to go. So simple design, what I would call a roadster style. I like the roadster style a lot. I don't like the lean forward so much as the cafe racer style. Now you may, if you're building a bike, you want that style. But this style is a good handling bike, primarily for pavement, although it could do okay on a hard-packed dirt road with the kinds of tires that it has on here. Moto Guzzi, Italian bike. All right, we'll get the next bike out and we'll talk about that. Okay, the next bike I'd like to show you is another BMW. This is a 1975 BMW R75/6. This bike, you know from listening to the conversation about the racing bike, the Cafe Racer. The R75 means that it's a 750cc motor. So not as big as the R90, the race bike now, but bigger than it was when it started. This is still the same size motor, same motor and same frame as has always been in this bike. It's an R75, 750cc. This bike has been customized to some extent, and I want to again go over some of the basics here to start with the seat. Notice the seat is a little bit thicker yet than we saw in the Moto Guzzi a moment ago. This one is also longer. This is for two-up riding. The Cafe Racer, BMW Cafe Racer, and the Moto Guzzi Roadster I showed you a moment ago, they're set up for one rider only. This is set up to be for possibility of two riders. It's got passenger foot pegs as well. The other bikes do not have that. And we'll talk about the handlebars too. The handlebars are once again a bit higher yet than they were even on the Moto Guzzi. So I call this a roadster style. Again, it's designed for those back roads. This bike would maybe be a little more comfortable going a little faster than the Moto Guzzi was. I've got the bike under a block of wood there to hold it up, but it's pretty much straight up, so we have to be careful to not lose balance on these things. Let's go around the other side and talk about some of the details. The foot pegs in this bike are in the same place as they are stock. In fact, they are stock foot pegs. So a little more forward, again, even with the end of the tank and the front of the seat for a nice upright riding position. When this bike first came to me, it had lower handlebars, so your legs were down straight, but your arms were forward. And I found that that was a little bit uncomfortable. So I changed them out for somewhat higher handlebars, a little bit narrower handlebars as well. But the pegs are in the stock position on both sides, of course. And handlebars a little bit higher, a little more upright riding position. Now I talked about speed, how this bike might be a little more comfortable for speed. these BMWs have a swing arm back here like all motorcycles have. But the length of the swing arm on the BMWs, there are two different ones. There's a short wheelbase swing arm, which brings the wheel forward more, and there's a longer wheelbase. This is the longer wheelbase one. The Cafe Racer I showed you had a shorter wheelbase. Shorter wheelbase, good for tight turns. Longer wheelbase, good for more stability at high speed. But again, still a bike that would be used for carving the back roads. The instrumentation on this one is high quality German Moto gadget tachometer with a built-in digital speedometer. It's nice to have the tach because as you're riding along, I don't care so much about how fast I'm going. I rarely really ride fast. It's not how I ride. But I like knowing what the motor's doing. So this gives me a tachometer. Tells me how the engine is performing. Up front, we have a single disc. This is the stock setup on the R75/6. I'm going to show you an R75/5 in a moment. That has a drum brake up front, but this is an early disc brake model from BMW. Single disc, vented, with the caliper there on the left-hand side. Only one disc. The racing bike had two. This could be retrofitted for two, where we need to get a different fork and the entire brake setup. But a single disc is satisfactory. The rear brake on this one, by the way, is a drum brake. The rear brake on that Moto Guzzi was a disc, and the rear brake on that Cafe Racer was actually a drum. A drum in the rear is perfectly fine for adequate stopping power. On this motor, we've used the stock carburetors, the Bing carburetors that came with the bike initially. We've got an aftermarket exhaust, nice and shiny, a little bit louder than stock. And once again, we've managed to take a lot of the gear that was in here, electronics gear, battery, whatnot, and put it somewhere else to clean up the overall look of the bike, which I like from a design standpoint. I like to see a bike, a motorcycle that showcases the engine and the tank and is kind of Spartan looking. It makes it look very clean, not cluttered with all kinds of things. The motors on these, by the way, are interesting because the cylinders go out to the side. The motor on the Moto Guzzi is interesting too because it's a V and they're out to the side this way. So these are out flat. Moto Guzzi is out like this. A Ducati is like this, and a Harley is like this. All kinds of interesting motors out there. And one of the things we can do with the bike is to, if we have something interesting, is to build it in such a way that it showcases the technology that was available at the time. Again, mid-70s. We've changed the grips a little bit. We've got a stock headlight on here. And once again, you can see how the handlebars rise more. So you have more of an upright position, a little more comfortable for riding. And once again, the seat, this is, of the three bikes we've seen so far, this is the softest, most comfortable seat. This is good for a little bit longer ride. The tires are vintage Firestone tires. They are a little square in the profile, which a lot of tires were back in the day. They don't handle quite the same way, but this bike was designed to have more of a vintage look. I did not buy this bike. I did not build this bike, rather. This was built by a local BMW master mechanic who did a very good job overhauling the engine and transmission and everything else. But it's a style that I like, and I like the vintage look. And again, I would call this a roadster. That's my term. All right, we'll switch bikes and I'll show you something else. We're continuing our discussion of the kind of bike we might like to build by looking at some of the bikes we have here in the shop in order to get some ideas, and then later we'll look at the parts that we have and we'll decide what exactly we want this next bike to be. Another style here, this is a 1971 BMW R75/5. Again, R75 means that it's a 750cc motor, medium size. These were down as low as 65, or earlier they were even smaller and up to 1000cc in the vintage that this bike is, 1971. Back in the 70s, they were that size. This is built in a scrambler style, what I call a scrambler style. And what's the distinctive on this one? Well, we start with the handlebars in this case. The handlebars are the highest we've seen yet. Remember, we started with the Cafe Racer way down here. We had a couple of roadsters that were about here, and now we've got a scrambler style, with much higher handlebars and a little more out to the side, a little wider stance. The last roadster we saw was a little bit narrower, so this is wider and higher. The seat is a one-up saddle. For scramblers, they may not be two up. Traditionally, if you're going to go on any dirt roads, maybe a rough ride and difficult ride with two up, but this is a one-up saddle. It's not real padded. There's some padding, not as thick as it was on the roadster. A scrambler could be a little thicker if that's what you wanted. I'll come around the other side. I spoke last time about wheelbase. This is a shorter wheelbase swing arm. So shorter wheelbase, once again, is a little better handling. I think it's a little bit better for a dirt bike. This is not a dirt bike, but a scrambler style means that it's good for on-road and dirt roads. Others that we've seen might be okay for a little bit of a dirt road. This one has the most aggressive tires that we've seen so far, and it would handle the dirt road a little better. So shorter swing arm, which means that we get a little better handling out of it. The foot pegs, once again, are stock, and they're right where they were designed to be. Right below the back end of the tank, a little bit farther forward on these than they were on others, again, for an upright riding position. And especially with the handlebars being as high as they are, you're definitely more upright on this bike. I find this to be a very comfortable ride. I like it. Even with the knobby tires, which are pretty aggressive looking anyway, they still handle reasonably well on pavement. And again, for the back roads around Nashua, it's a great ride. On the rear, we have a drum brake. We talked about that before. All the BMWs we've seen so far are drum brake in the rear. Drum brake is fine for good stopping. When you brake, most of the braking is done by the front anyway, and that's why manufacturers went gradually to disc brakes in the front, and later they adopted them for the rear. The Moto Guzzi we saw had 2 disc brakes up front and 1 in the rear. It was designed to be more sporty. The others are designed to be more like road bikes. So we talked about the rear brake, we talked about the foot pegs, seat height. This is an older style motor. It's actually got a Kickstarter on this one. The other BMWs we've seen so far no longer had the Kickstarter. It has electric start, but it can also be started with a kicker. Stock carburetors on this one. Stock carburetors are good for overall riding. If you want more power, which we don't necessarily need with the Scrambler, if you want more power, you can go with an aftermarket carburetor. And we'll consider that when we're talking about the bike that we're going to build. And up front, we have a drum brake. The drum brake up front, there's no disc. Remember on the last bike, we had a left-hand side disc. On the Cafe Racer, we had 2 discs, and the same on the Moto Guzzi. The drum brake on these early bikes is just fine. You get great stopping power. In fact, I would say that it takes less grip on the right-hand handle there, which is the brake control, less grip, less of a force to get this bike stopped with the front drum brake than it does with maybe a single disc in the early years. Drum brakes in the 70s were kind of reaching their pinnacle of development, and they were pretty effective, certainly for the rears and really for the front too. When they transitioned from the drum brake to the disc brake up front, it took a little more effort. It was the beginning. Certainly now, if you were to buy a modern sport bike with disc brakes up front, it's a feather light brush of the brake to get tremendous stopping power. I spoke about Brembo brakes earlier. If you have a Ducati with front Brembo brakes, you're going to have a ton of stopping power. But back in the day here, back in 1971, with this drum brake, the bike rode fine, and certainly it does today too. This is a bike that I built, by the way. I like the Scrambler style. We've done a couple other things too. We put on these fork gaiters. They're called gaiters. They're designed to protect the fork, particularly if you're riding on a dirt road. So this is just a little more protection, part of the style of a Scrambler. And on this bike, we kept the original headlight bucket. Original headlight bucket on this is special because of the shape. I like the shape of it. And we also have the speedometer and tachometer, 2 instruments built into one circle. Very, very nice, classic look on the bike. So this is the first Scrambler that we've seen. Again, high handlebar, knobby tires that are great for dirt, but also reasonably good for pavement, shorter wheelbase, and an upright riding position. All right, we've got one more to show you. We're going to go from here to an enduro style, and we're going to depart from some of the customization and consider just a stock restoration as well. BMW R75/5 Scrambler. Okay, the last bike I have to show you is a departure from the ones we've seen before. We've seen 3 BMWs now and a Moto Guzzi, and now we're away from the European bikes. We're back to a Japanese bike in this case. This is a 1976 Honda XL350. This is an enduro bike. The cafe racer style we saw before was strictly for road, and then we had a couple of roadsters that were primarily for road, but could be on dirt if we needed to. If we got down a road and ended up on dirt, we could navigate it okay. We saw a scrambler, which is definitely okay on dirt. And now we have an enduro, which is more at home on dirt than it is on pavement, although this bike does fine on pavement as well. An enduro means you can just keep going, basically. So you're not worried about the road becoming dirt or even becoming a more narrow trail. I've had this bike on a very aggressive class 6 road, I guess you would call it, up in Vermont. I'm not sure if that's exactly class 6 or what the class was, but it was a narrow track, pretty steep, rocks and roots, and a car would not make it up, a truck would not make it. Maybe a four-wheeler could, but this bike could as well. So this is a stock restoration. There's no customization here. Everything here is stock. This one was built from a lot of parts, and we spoke earlier, or if I haven't, I neglected it to say that bikes can come in a variety of states. You know, some of them come in complete, ready to go. You just got to tear it down, rebuild everything, and put it back together. Others come in maybe a frame and some wheels, maybe a motor, and boxes of parts which may or may not fit. This one came in as a box of parts. So many of the parts in this bike were not from the original bike, but they are all original to the XL50 design. And in some cases, if you want to do a restoration from something that's not complete, it's possible. You just have to shop a lot for the vintage parts. So we've got the highest seat we've seen so far, the thickest seat. It's not necessarily the most comfortable because this was designed back in the 70s. In fact, this is an original seat from the 70s. So the rubber and whatnot is a little worn and probably firmed up on it. But it's the thickest seat that we've seen, made for the roughest of terrain. Very high handlebars. Once again, foot pegs are where we would expect them to be for stock. A little bit forward of the back end of the tank. Down here, they're also metal with spikes on them, so you have good grip. A lot of times enduros are ridden standing up, so you have good grip there. We've got a taller suspension and more give. This bike is designed for the rougher roads. Stock tank, and everything is stock. Stock handlebars, stock instrumentation, which includes a tachometer and a speedometer. Very good condition. And we've got a drum brake in the rear on the other side. Again, what this bike was designed to have. And we have a drum brake in the front. Again, the stock design. Not very aggressive. These bikes weren't designed to go fast. You're not diving into a corner, with maximum braking like you're on a racing track. You're navigating the backwoods. The tires are more different in their size than they were on any of the other bikes that we saw. Some of them were 18 and 18 front and rear. Others were 18 in the rear, 19 in the front. And this one we have 18 in the rear. I believe it's 18, might be 17. I'm not sure on this one, I don't remember exactly, but a 21 in the front. And the larger front wheel enables it to go over bumps a little better. Also, we're not quite as concerned with the pristine condition. The other bikes were cleaner in terms of dirt and as well as in terms of design. But this bike is stock, and it's designed to be the vintage but well-maintained bike that it is. A fun bike to ride, a lot of fun to ride. It's very low on horsepower. This is the smallest engine, a 350 single. The other cylinders, the other bikes were 500 or 750 or 900. And it's only a 350 single cylinder. It's about, I think it's like 22.5 horsepower, not much, but it's geared such that you can climb a telephone pole with this thing practically. It'll just go right up. This was one of the top-of-the-line enduro bikes from the mid-70s. Fun bike to ride. And this is a restoration. So if we have parts, or if you have parts that you want to put back into stock form, it's certainly possible. A lot of times if parts are missing, we may go the custom route because you just can't find them. Or if you want to dig around, you can find the custom parts from somewhere. In fact, one part here I had an order from Germany. There was someone who had what I needed in Germany, and it's possible to find these vintage parts. People are stripping down a bike or find a bike in the garage or something and are now selling the parts. Very nice bike. We did this one a few years ago, and it's a stock restoration. 1976 Honda XL350. And that concludes actually the bikes that we want to look at. We're going to now cut to, or get some of the parts out that we have and talk about inventory and talk about what we might want to build. Remember, there's the full range from cafe racer through roadster to scrambler to enduro. We've gone from low seat and low handlebars to higher seat and higher handlebars. We've gone from a lean forward riding position, very aggressive, to a more upright riding position. And again, it's really going to depend on what kind of riding you want to do. And we're going to take a look at our parts, see what we can build. We don't want to spend money we don't have to spend. We're going to see what the parts that we have would lend themselves best to. So we'll go from there. Back in a minute. Okay, we're back to our project table. And we've taken a look at several bikes in the shop here. We've looked at some examples from an internet posting of the different kinds of bikes that can be built. We've seen bobbers and scramblers and cafe racers and enduros. Now we're going to take a look at the parts that are available. I mentioned earlier that we've got Moto Guzzi parts here, we've got BMW parts here, we've got Kawasaki parts here, we have Honda parts here. We have a lot of parts in the shop, but we don't necessarily have enough of any one of those or some of the others in order to make a complete bike. But I looked around and I found that we have the essentials for building a BMW. What are they? We've got a motor. This is a motor from a 1975 BMW R75/7. It was a 750cc motor. It's been overhauled. It came to me overhauled. I'll tell you how the parts came in a moment. And with a BMW, these engines are modular, and you can pop off the old cylinders and put on larger cylinders. So this 750 has been bumped up to a 1000 cc, and it's a fresh motor, ready to go, never run. So we've got a good motor, 1000 cc motor. That's a lot of power. We'd like to put that to use. Here are some of the other essentials spread around here. We have a frame. This is the frame that this motor originally came from. This is an R75/7. And the interesting thing about this, we have more than one frame, but the interesting thing about this frame and this motor is that when BMW built it, they put the same serial number on the frame as they put on their motors, and this frame and this motor go together, so they have the same serial number. When you'll see in an ad sometimes, you'll say someone has a motorcycle for sale, custom motorcycle, restored or whatever, with matching numbers. That's what it means. It means we have a frame that has the same serial number as the engine. This bike, if we have the option, let's make it with matching numbers. The other frame I have is for a 1000 cc motor. It's an R100 frame. I may consider using that. I'm going to take a look at it more closely. The motor itself will fit into either one, but which frame we want to use, I think I like the idea of the matching numbers. We've got a gas tank. Gas tank's in pretty good shape. It's been lined. There's no leaks. When I say lined, someone has put some liquid in there to seal it. There are no rust spots, no leaks, no apparent leaks. It looks to be in decent shape. And so we have a tank. We have a transmission sitting here too. On BMWs, the transmission is a separate piece from the engine. On Kawasaki's and Hondas, the transmission is built into the engine. So you have an engine, it already has a transmission. In this case, we have a transmission separate. We have a transmission. These can be hard to find. This happens to be a 5-speed transmission. The red bike I showed you earlier, that's a 4-speed. And the black Cafe Racer and the green Roadster, those were both 5-speed transmissions. 5-speed, you get a little more out of it. It's a little easier to ride. The 4-speed is fine, but it's a little more sedate, let's say. And we'll talk about riding style in a moment. We have front forks. The forks are on the front end here, and they hold the wheel. We've got a good pair of front forks. These can be hard to find too. It's set up for a dual disc. We'll have a dual disc bike. We have that available to us. And we have wheels. I like spoked wheels. Some of the motorcycles have a mag wheel or a cast wheel. It's not magnesium generally, it's usually aluminum, but they can be cast. And I personally prefer the spoke wheel. I like the vintage look. We'll take those apart and we'll put in all new spokes and relace them. And of course, new tires and tubes. So those are the basics. We have essentially what we need. Now, in the opening shot, there were some other parts. I've got a swing arm. I've got the seat subframe, many seat subframes, many swing arms. We'll choose the best one. We've got some handlebars. Maybe we'll buy new handlebars, whatnot. We'll see. We've got carburetors. We've got some electrical equipment, and on and on. But we don't have everything. This bike came essentially as you're seeing it. It was not a rolling bike. Some of the other bikes I mentioned were rolling bikes. This was not a rolling bike, so we have to source a lot of parts, probably on the internet or in the shop. We've got a lot of spare parts here. Some will be original, some will be aftermarket, but we have the basic backbone of what we need. Now, what do we want to do with it? That's the next question. You saw the different bikes. It's a matter of personal taste. I like the enduro style, I like the scrambler style, and I like the roadster style. But which should it be? I'm not a big fan of the cafe racer. It's hard for me to ride. I'm tall, long legs, long arms. I fold up too much. I feel too tight on the frame. And I don't generally race. Here in New Hampshire, we have a lot of country roads not far away from Nashua. And so within 10 minutes, I can be on some nice country roads through farms. And the speed limits there are 35 or 40. And the road just kind of snakes along. And I enjoy carving turns at 35 or 40 miles an hour on a nice warm afternoon. And that's the kind of riding I do. So I don't need to go fast. I don't need to aggressively dive into corners, maximum braking like you would on a track. So the cafe racer style is probably not for me. We do have some dirt roads around here too, and generally speaking, I like to be able to continue when the pavement ends. You take some nice roads and you end up with the pavement ending, and now what do? If you got a road bike, a street bike, a strictly street bike, like a cafe racer, it's a little hard to continue because those tires are pretty squirrely on dirt. The red bike, the red BMW I showed you, that can handle a dirt road, and of course the Honda Enduro I showed you could too. But what about matching what I have to the kind of bike that it ought to be, taking full advantage of the 1000cc engine? I like the 1000cc. I like acceleration. I don't need to go fast, but I want to twist that throttle and feel the torque and feel the bike really accelerate. So I enjoy riding from 0 to 40. After 40, you're riding along. That's my personal style. But so I think I want to make a road bike rather than an enduro, and probably rather than a scrambler too. I'm going to try the road bike. And what I've been talking about with some of the bikes you've seen, particularly the Moto Guzzi, I call it a roadster. Now, a roadster, it wasn't on that sheet. It's something maybe I and maybe some others have thought about. It's not on that sheet specifically, but it's a bike that handles well, sounds really good, has some of that acceleration that I like, and looks like it's made to go. It's a style that I like. So I'm thinking about making a roadster for the back roads in New Hampshire, where I can take advantage of the 1000cc motor and the acceleration it's going to afford. But it's not going to be a dirt road bike. You can make a 1000cc enduro or a 1000cc scrambler, but generally speaking, they're a little bit lower on the cubic displacement and horsepower. So taking advantage of the horsepower, taking advantage of some of the parts I have, I think we're going to do a roadster style. We're looking forward to that. And the next steps are to take a more complete inventory and to begin to put together a budget. I've done some of that. I'll share that with you when I can. A moment ago, I spoke about the next steps on this project. That is to take a detailed inventory, look in all the boxes, and really try to figure out exactly what we have and what might fit together. We did a broad strokes inventory just a few moments ago where we saw we had a frame and a motor and transmission, and et cetera. But as I get into the details, I'm coming up with a few surprises. We'll talk more about that next time. But in the meantime, I hope that you enjoyed this first episode of The Garage, where we're going to be undertaking to build a BMW custom motorcycle out of a big pile of old parts. And if you like the show, please hit the like button down below and subscribe to the channel. And watch for the next episode. And hopefully in the end, we'll have a custom bike that's fun to ride and looks good and sounds good too. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.